Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today's project is going to be another piece of home decor. This time we'll be reupholstering an office chair. This is an office chair that belongs to a friend of mine who has had it since college. And when I tell you this thing is trash, I'm gonna reupholster it. We'll be using this beautiful cowhide suede leather in sand. It is really, it's just everything. So we'll be reupholstering it with this and making it brand new, or as new as we can possibly make it. And before I start to ramble on, I've been staring at this thing for days and I'm ready to rip it to shreds. So yeah, let's get started. We have our screws loosened up. I just took the back off, and of course all we're gonna do is just rip off this nasty little piece of fabric and measure that out according to the leather, and we'll do the same for this. Measure our leather pieces out according to the piece. I'm really not a fan of black, so I'm thinking of, since we are going with a lighter leather, I'm thinking of spray painting this and these legs. Since they are plastic, I can easily just spray paint over that. But for now, we're gonna go ahead and tear it down and then put it back together. So in taking apart the fabric pieces to see, how much I would need to cut, notice that all the edges of each piece are gathered together. If you don't know what gathered is, that is when they do this treatment along the edges, pretty much so that when you place it around an object, the fabric gathers like this, and you get this form-fitting piece of fabric. So, because I've never seen this done with leather, I am going to show you a technique that could work for leather. So for now, I'm just going to finish stretching it completely open so that I can get an exact measurement of this piece, so that I can trace everything out on my leather before I cut it out. All right, moving on to the next step. Now that we have all of our leather pieces cut, we can start working on gathering the edges of our leather ends. I am using a sewing machine for mine because my pieces are fairly big. However, if you do not have a sewing machine, you can also gather your edges via hand. So all you will need is your sample piece of, or your piece of leather, and a revolving hole punch. So I took my leather hole punch. I used the smallest hole because you don't want your holes super big. The thread that I'm using is actually a hand stitch thread. You could also use leather cording. I would recommend the smallest cording that you can find. I'm using a hand stitch thread and it is a 0.8 millimeter. That's big enough. The other thing is that you want to make sure you space out your holes, so that when you start to gather, the holes aren't so freaking close together that you're having issues gathering. So I just punched holes along the edge of my piece. I took my thread and just intertwined it through. Once I have my thread going through, you can knot it at the end, and then I'm just gonna hold the end that I am going to pull. And as you can see, it's going to start gathering the leather. I will show you that again because the camera wants to focus on me. We don't need to focus on me right now. We need it on this leather. So let's do that one more time. Stretch out our piece. You can add a knot at the end, but make sure you double, triple, quadruple knot it so it does not go through the hole. But for now, I'm just going to hold the end that I'm pulling the thread, and it is gathering as I'm doing that. As you can see, it's starting to cinch together. Now, because the ends or the edge is gathered or cinched, you can form fit it to whatever you want it to go on. In our case, we're putting it on a chair. So I want it to form fit the curves and the edges of the chair. And that would be if you are doing it by hand. In my case, because these pieces are pretty big, I'm doing it by machine. The only difference with using a machine is that you want your thread to be as thick as possible, especially when you're gathering, because as you start to pull that thread, you don't want it breaking on you. So use the thickest thread possible, and I would suggest 1/38. Also, you want to make sure that you are pulling out as much thread as possible. I would say this is long enough, but you want it long enough so that when you start to gather, you have ample amount of thread to pull. And for my stitch size, I'm gonna turn it up to a 9 because you kind of want your stitches to be pretty wide apart. You do not want them close together. The closer they are together, the more tedious it will be to gather leather. Additionally, because this piece is super long, I'm gonna do 1/2 with the stitch and then the other half with the stitch. Because if I try to do a continuous stitch going all the way around, it's gonna take forever to gather this one piece. So I do have markings at my half point, so I'm gonna stop right here. And then I'm going to pull that thread out. So this will be 1/2 of my leather fabric, and then I'm gonna do the other half. And as you can see, you kind of want this little puckering because it'll help you gather the leather. So that's one end. This long, cut that off. So I'm leaving this piece super long. So we have ample amount of thread to gather our piece, and we're gonna do that next. You wanna hold one thread and pull the other thread. And what you'll probably have to do, because the leather is so thick, and it's not just gonna scoot on its own or gather on its own as it would if it was a really thin piece of fabric. You'll just have to scoop the leather along. So you'll just continue doing this as much as you can, going all the way around, and that'll start to gather those edges so we can form fit it over the chair. So far we have the top portion of our back piece gathered, but what I'm gonna do before I gather the entire thing, this was just to show you guys how to gather, but you really want to gather it on the actual chair or whatever it is that you're cinching the edges for. So in my case, this is the back piece of our chair. So I'm just gonna go ahead and scoop this on here so that the piece is actually form-fitting the actual chair. Because I'm scooting it on here, it'll probably come loose a little bit, but that's fine. You'll just take your thread and go ahead and do the same technique that I just did right now, just so you can see how it gathers on the actual object. For this particular chair, I actually didn't want to do the gathering technique, but it is something that I wanted to show you just in case you've never seen it done with leather. For now, I'm going to move forward with doing my reupholstering how I normally would do. I'm also on a time crunch, so I wanted to make sure this was as fast and effective as possible. So I'm going through with my trusty heavy-duty staple gun to make sure that this leather is on here tight and secure. From here, I'm just going to spray paint the legs of this chair because that black was unnecessary. It just wasn't cute. It really needs to coordinate with the leather, so we're just going to spray paint this white. and then we'll finish up the rest of the chair. And this is how the bottom portion looks after everything is nice and dry. I think it looks much better than the black, and it'll coordinate with the tan leather perfectly. As you can see, I spray painted everything except for that middle metal section, just because I still wanted it to have that appearance of an office chair. So I left that element, and this is the final look of our suede leather office chair. And instead of just leaving it, you know, this basic suede color, I wanted to coordinate a little bit with the bottom of the legs by adding this piping design to the edge of the back of the chair, and I really love the way that it came out. So that wraps up this project. If you have one of these office chairs, trust me, reupholstering it is not as daunting as it looks. It's super easy. Give it a try, give your chair a makeover, and I'll catch you on the next one.